Okay, I'm going to share just a short little story that someone wrote from our Sunday school devotional, our Bible study. We don't really get to go through the whole Bible study every week because we're so busy talking to each other, which is a good thing because that means we're really thinking about what we're reading in our Bible study. But this was at the back end of that whole Bible study today, and this is something that I was noticing, even just the power of just when other Christians are talking to each other. Me and Patrice were talking after lunch today even about this, to just be able to see this come up in this passage or in this story was just kind of speaking to me about just when Christians are talking to each other, the same exact thing comes up in another part of your life that day. So I felt like sharing this. The passage, or the title is Context is Everything. And the writer says, Jeremiah 29:11 is one of the first verses I remember memorizing, along with John 3:16, Philippians 4:13, Romans 8:28. When my wife and I selected a life verse for our firstborn son, we picked Jeremiah 29:11. As we mentioned earlier in this lesson, it was 2011's most searched verse on a popular Bible website. Taken by itself, it communicates the hope and security we can find in the care of our watchful God. But like so many promises from Scripture, when we lift them out of their context, they lose so much of their richness and depth. Don't get me wrong, they aren't any less inspired. They're just a lot more superficial. We really shouldn't memorize verse 11 without also memorizing verse 10, which says, When 70 years for Babylon are complete, I will attend to you and will confirm my promise concerning you to restore you to this place. God's promise that he has not forgotten his people is so much more meaningful when we realize it was given to a people who would spend their entire lives in captivity. Yes, there is a future hope, but God will accomplish his purpose for his glory first. His glory is always a much higher priority than our prosperity. In the same way, we shouldn't memorize Romans 8:28 without also memorizing Romans 8:29. Yes, God causes all things to work for the good of those that love God and are called according to his purpose. But what is that purpose? Those he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. That's verse 29. The good God is working towards does not mean only good things will happen to us. Instead, all things will happen to us, good and bad. They will be used to make us more like Jesus. There are only two examples of why context matters. Try one on your own. Maybe you have Philippians 4:13 memorized because you saw it tattooed on the bicep of a professional football player. However, based on verse 12, do you think Paul was saying that we will win every game, get every promotion, close every deal, and hit every home run because we can do all things through Christ who gives us strength? If not, what is he saying? Context is everything. And the verse me and Patrice were even just talking about, verse 29:11, this was like the most popular one on BibleGateway.com. The verse 11 says, For I know the plans I have for you. This is the Lord's declaration, plans for your welfare, not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. And I always turn to that verse when I'm trying to talk through like a new believer or someone who's going through a tough time, maybe a death in their family, or I have friends who are going through a miscarriage. And that really helps. But when me and Patrice were even talking about it, I was thinking, for some people, their definition of a disaster, it might be the very thing that I would say is good for them. Like those of us who have been caught by the law, it's not really the law that was convicting me, but it was God's law in the law that is even upholding God's law. That would be like a disaster in my life, but it was the thing that was good for me. As in, we could be in that situation, not learn anything from it, or we could see that, this feels like a disaster, but there's something good going to come from this. Even just reading this, the plans for your welfare, not for disaster, to give you a future and hope. No matter what is happening, even in this country or just around this world, our future and our hope, no matter what, for those who believe Christ, it's the heavenly hope. that there is something out there bigger than even just what's going on, maybe even the 70 years in this country that could happen. And one thing I brought home from this whole devotional story was there is this idea of an American dream, but for us as Christians, our American dream, really for me especially, is just what the Bible is teaching, to have the Word stored up in our hearts, just to be teaching our children. All these things can be going on in our country that we don't agree with, we know God doesn't agree with, but what are we doing in the face of all that disaster? What are we sharing? What kind of hope? What kind of love? The kind of love that God says to love your neighbor as yourself, to love God more than anything else. What does all that mean? And yeah, when I was thinking of the American dream, what can that mean to us as Christians? Because it's not going to be about just prosperity. Because being a Christian, it might look like you're prosperous, but really the whole testimony is of all the things that aren't just material, the heavenly hope. No matter what, heaven is, I think, going to be is what we really inherit, the prosperity. So that's what I had to share.
Thanks, Dan.